Welcome back for another edition of Whatcha Readin'. People ask me all the time, as a esteemed, world-renowned, world-famous comic book writer, what I do for a living. Not about what I do for a living, but what I'm reading. And what I do for a living, that's my other thing. Uh, so they ask me what I'm reading when I'm not writing. And let's get right to what I've been reading. I read this great big book about the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV show. It was written in 1987, so some of the material is dated, but the author had the advantage of being able to interview a lot of the people involved with the show as they were still among us. And these things are usually just like these kind of books are usually just like a fan letter to the show, just extended bloviating about how much the author loved the show when he was younger. Um, but this book's different. It goes into quite a bit of depth. It's kind of a post-mortem. It's a deep analysis of how the show was created, and its trials and travails with ratings and production problems and things like that. And it, it's quite excellent and told me a lot of stuff that I never ever knew. Now, Man from U.N.C.L.E., if you're not familiar with it, was a TV show that came about not at the not at the height of the spy craze. It kind of anticipated the spy craze in the 1960s, which I did not know till I read this book. Um, that U.N.C.L.E. was on the air at the time that Goldfinger was released here in the United States. And Goldfinger, as anyone living in the period knows, was the beginning of Bond mania. It was the beginning of the spy craze. It was the crest of the wave. Goldfinger really blew up the whole fad of espionage stories, filled with wild action and crazy characters and colorful villains. And Man from U.N.C.L.E. was right there at the start of it. Not Man from U.N.C.L.E. was not a reaction to the popularity of Goldfinger and the rise of James Bond's fame. It coasted along right beside it, and the reason for that is, and I had no idea about this till I read this book, was that Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, had a part in creating Man from U.N.C.L.E. Uh, the original producer of Man from U.N.C.L.E. had the idea, and he wanted to create a spy series, sort of lighthearted action story. Uh, kind of. He felt that the Western TV Western was over, the cycle was ending, and they would need replacement. They would need a different kind of story. And this guy was somewhat of a seer. So he approached Ian Fleming, and they signed a contract where Fleming would consult and help create this new series called Solo, originally called Solo. Went through many name changes. And Fleming did contribute some stuff. He named Napoleon Solo. He also named April Dancer, who would be the girl from U.N.C.L.E. And he came up with a few ideas here and there. And then Saltzman and Broccoli, a pair of Hollywood producers, or not Hollywood producers, but film producers and big players in the world of film who owned the movie rights to James Bond, found out about this, were not happy that Ian Fleming was sharing his ideas about a spy series with a different set of producers. And so he began suing everybody. he sued the producers of U.N.C.L.E. He probably even sued Ian Fleming. They sued NBC. They sued Arena Productions, which produced Man from U.N.C.L.E., and they sued MGM, the studio at which U.N.C.L.E. was being produced. And in the end, Ian Fleming's name was wiped from everything, and everybody being sued was warned, you will never mention Mr. Fleming's name in connection with this property ever again. So that is why no one seems to know that Ian Fleming helped create Man from U.N.C.L.E. The producers then turned to Sam Rolfe, who had created the series Have a Gun Will Travel, and he became more or less the mastermind behind the series. And it was enormously popular. Man from U.N.C.L.E. was hugely, after a bad start in its first season, by the end of its first season, it was climbing in the ratings, and its second season, the ratings were enormous. It was must-see TV and spawned, of course, tons and tons of merchandising. In a previous What You're Reading, I talked about this first paperback novel, which sold over 1 million copies. It was published in 60 different countries, in 60 different languages, and lots of other merchandising. I had the Man from Uncle gun. I had everything Uncle. I just loved this show when I was a kid. I built the Man from Uncle Aurora models. I had the Man from Uncle plastic figures. I did not have the Man from Uncle lunchbox because my family was not so financially fixed that they could afford to buy me a new lunchbox every year. So I had to keep going to school with my old one. Oh, poor me. So, and but Uncle would continue on for 3.5 seasons. Various reasons why it began to fall in the ratings. One of which was it kind of lost its edge. Sam Rolfe left the series in the first season, and that kind of took the heart out of the show. There was no one guiding it. The first season has some awesome episodes, and it walks the line between action story, suspenseful action story, and lighthearted adventure. Quite a bit of humor, not comedy, but humor. But as the series went on, they brought in more and more comedy, and this show became a parody of itself, which was a shame. The producers and the network didn't seem to understand what had made the show so popular in the second half of its first season. One of the theories is that Nielsen ratings did not apply to fraternity houses. It was only private residences. And Man from Uncle, in its initial season, took off on college campuses, and college students were watching it. And when they went home for Christmas, they told their families about this great show they were watching. And over the Christmas holidays, Man from Uncle saw a rise in ratings. And that rise in ratings would continue into the summer months when the reruns started. And the reruns were outrating the original airing of the episodes, and the reruns were outrating everything else in their time slot as well. Helping this along was that later in the season they aired the first episodes filmed. Now, the first episodes filmed contained the balance of espionage, action, lighthearted adventure, and humor that I mentioned earlier. But these episodes, NBC hated them, and they wanted the show to be tougher, wanted to be about tough guys. And so they front loaded the tough guy episodes, which didn't do as well. And then when they finally aired the episodes that were more in line with what Sam Rolfe was going for, the ratings zoomed. And I'll specifically talk about one of those episodes coming up. What also hurt the series was in the second season, or the third season, they spun off the girl from Uncle. And it kind of, people that worked on the shows are split about Girl from Uncle. Some thought that the inevitable, the drop in ratings for both shows was inevitable, but a number of people, Robert Vaughn among them, thought that Girl from Uncle took away from Man from Uncle. It was oversaturation, and also the far more comedy or parody oriented elements in Girl from Uncle diluted the brand. And I kind of have to agree with Robert Vaughn. Though the show was fun, it took something away from the original. And but the show would continue on after Girl from Uncle's cancellation for another like half season. Only half of season 4 made it to the air before the show was eventually canceled. And it kind of comes in, line with the fading away of the spy fad. The Bond mania was over with rather quickly. By the time You Only Live Twice comes along, Bond is really the only super spy left on the movie screens and TV screens. Everybody else is gone except for Get Smart, which continued on for a number of years. And but like I said, loved the show when I was a kid. Big fan. The book also goes into the production problems they had, and one of them was is that the show had had a crappy budget. Um, Given that it was supposed to be a globe-trotting, uh, hyperactive adventure story, the network didn't give them any more money than they would give to, say, an episode of Dr. Kildare, which took place all on interior sets and just people talking. So Man from Uncle had to be creative with the use of its minuscule budget. And one of the things they did, obviously, was they shot almost the entire series completely on MGM backlots. So you got to see the same sets over and over and over again, imaginatively shot from different angles. The problem with this is that a lot of other shows are using the MGM backlots as well. And, if you watched enough television, you began to recognize the streets over and over again. Um, and another complication was the fact that other series were using it for different purposes. Combat was often using Man from Uncle's European village set. And of course, the combat crew left the place a mess because it was a war story. And the Man from Uncle crew would always have to come in and clean up. This staircase in particular appears over and over again in both Combat, Man from Uncle, and every other damn series MGM did. Whenever they went to Europe or they went to England, this staircase is doubled for, the staircases to palaces, haciendas, English manor homes, and imaginatively shot from different angles. You wouldn't notice unless you were binge watching shows like we do now. Binge watching took away the reuse of sets, that luxury they had. But they're really good at shooting on backlots. They've very rarely ever left the MGM, area. Uh, Occasionally, they would go to Santa Monica when they needed a beach scene, or they would go to the Fox Ranch if they needed more rural settings. And they shot in Griffith Park because all these shows shot in Griffith Park. And but it's kind of fun to watch the show and see how they use these things. Particularly, I'll talk a little bit more about it when I talk about a particular episode. Coming up, we'll review a particular episode. Um, the thing about the budget is the budget never went up. Even as the show became successful, they didn't raise the budget. So they still had these constraints. And to solve this, the producers came up with the brilliant idea of releasing them as films overseas, releasing Man from Uncle movies or episodes as films. And in order to facilitate this, Man from Uncle has a lot of two-part episodes. And two-part episodes allowed them to stretch that budget. So they were able to make a deal with their guest stars. Well, I know you make X amount for each episode, but we're going to have you in two episodes, which guarantees you 2 weeks' work. So, would you take a little less money? And so they were bargaining there. They were also, if they had to build new, unique sets, they could use those sets in two episodes rather than in one and then having to destroy them. Also, surprisingly, the Man from Uncle movies proved very, very profitable. Now, I don't remember ever seeing these here in the United States. I think they were released here in the United States. I'm amazed they weren't shown at Saturday matinees when I was a kid. But they did most of the business overseas. They're actually quite profitable, but none of that money seemed to make it back. In addition to the millions and millions that the Man from Uncle merchandising had, I'm going to guess the Man from Uncle merchandising at the peak, it was probably worth like $500 million a year, because that's how big it was. And I'm comparing it to like Davy Crockett from 10 years before, which was like 300 million in its first year. Let's have inflation enter as a factor. So Man from Uncle, while it was running and while it was big, was a cash cow from every direction, which really raises a question to me about all of television that me and the rest of the boomers watched as a kid. It was all cheap jack. It was all thrown together. There was no money put into it. They didn't care particularly about production values, as long as it looked good on the TV screen. They didn't mind reusing sets, reusing stories, reusing jokes over and over and over again on all of these shows. And where was all that money going? It was going into somebody's pockets, because think about it. You watch a TV show today on some streaming service and has X number of subscribers, even network television, even basic cable shows, and they have a feature film level of production. I mean, these shows look great. They're spending a fortune on these shows. I mean, millions and millions of dollars, tens of $1 million in some case, per episode to make these shows look good. And this is at a time when there's lots of competition. Back in the day when they were producing these shows that boomers like me remember, there was no competition. There were 3 channels. You had to watch one or the other. And the only place for advertising to go was on these 3 channels. There was no competition. The money being made off these shows had to be extraordinary. Then they go into syndication, international distribution. I mean, a show like Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Gunsmoke or the Beverly Hillbillies had to be just raining cash down on Hollywood. And yet none of it was ever used to make the shows better. A show like Man from U.N.C.L.E., I think, would have been able to continue had they pumped a little bit more cashola into the series. And that's true of so many shows. But, I guess the people producing them were more concerned with the size of the house they could buy and the number of cars they could own. And trading in one wife for a more expensive one than they were with what we were actually watching on television. I always have this question, why didn't they spend more money on the shows? So it's always a law of diminishing returns. Anyway, late in the season of Man from U.N.C.L.E., the first season, which was aired in black and white, even though it was filmed in color, they ran an episode called The Never Never Affair. And it starred Barbara Feldon and Cesar Romero. And I remember vividly seeing this episode. Now, I watched Man from U.N.C.L.E. I'd watched it. It was up against other shows I liked as well. So sometimes I would watch Man from U.N.C.L.E., sometimes I wouldn't. I managed to catch the Never Never Land the first night it aired and became an U.N.C.L.E. fan forever, because this episode is fantastic. It's a fantastic story. It's well set up. It's the perfect blend, as Sam Rolfe intended, of high adventure and comedy. Barbara Feldon plays a secretary at U.N.C.L.E. who wishes she had a more exciting life. She wants to be a spy. Why can't she go out and have adventures? And so Napoleon Solo gives her a rather pointless clerical errand to run in Manhattan, but tells her it's very dangerous. It could be very dangerous for her, and convinces her that she is on a super secret spy mission rather than a simple errand. In a mix-up in communication, Barbara Feldon is actually given a highly sensitive piece of intelligence to deliver. And when she leaves the U.N.C.L.E. headquarters, she is pursued doggedly across Manhattan by Thrush agents. Thrush being the bad guys in the series. Napoleon realizes this, and U.N.C.L.E. moves to find her, wandering around Manhattan with this super secret data that everybody wants, the MacGuffin. And it's just such a fun episode. It's so well put together and shows the genius of these guys in using the MGM backlot to make you feel as though you're wandering all over Manhattan, from the area of the United Nations building all the way up into the E70s. But it's all done, it's all done on backlots. It's all done with streets you've seen over and over and over again in movies, from the 30s onward. But it's that perfect blend. And it was one of the things that contributed to the huge ratings rise, was this particular episode. And I was so glad when I watched it that it held up to my memories, fully held up to my memories, even more so because now, as a writer myself and everything else, I'm recognizing what went into this episode to make it special. And then the book further confirmed that. NBC saw the episode and fell in love with it. MGM saw it and fell in love with it. And they said, make all the episodes like this. The Never Never Affair is now your high watermark. It's your high benchmark for a Man from Uncle episode. Try to make every episode like this one. So that's pretty cool that 10 or 11-year-old me spotted quality amongst the draws. To be that was actually being confirmed in the high places, the palaces, the ivory towers of Hollywood. So that's pretty cool. Um, Another book I read. This is a French book, so I didn't really read it. I tried. I looked at the pictures. It's a series called Angel Wings, and it's an excellent series that features a female character who is a cargo plane pilot during World War II. And before you go, oh man, they're feminizing the story, and that didn't. No, that happened. They were so short of pilots that they would have, they would hire female pilots. Either they were in the military or even hired commercially to move cargo planes around. And this places this character at the China, Burma, India theater, facing the Japanese and everything else. And we follow her career to the Korea conflict. And the story mostly involves a visit by Marilyn Monroe to, she's visiting the troops as part of a PR campaign or USO thing or whatever. And a lot of the suspense comes from the fact that North Korean agents are looking to assassinate Marilyn Monroe as a propaganda coup. And while it all sounds a little bit silly, it's not. It's a good story, and it's well presented. And as you can see, the art is absolutely freaking gorgeous. Attention to period detail and military equipment and all the rest of it. It's absolutely amazing. So the series is called Angel Wings. If you ever see it, I think it's available on Kindle, translated into English. So I just can't read comics on Kindle, but I think it is available on Kindle, and so you can find the series and read it. Somebody really needs to publish it here in the United States. It's just a terrific series, full of a lot of high flying adventure, aviation action, and quite a bit of heart. There's quite a bit of loss. It's an unvarnished view of the war in the air, in the skies over World War II as well as Korea. So that's it for me this week. I want to thank you for listening. Thanks to you for watching, liking, and all the rest of it. And I will see you down the road right after I read some more stuff.